Bupe is amazing. She is one of these midwives who doesn't just see the problem, she will also try and find the solution. And part of that, her full bio is on the website, vidum.org on the program, but she has helped co-found newborn support in Zambia, an organisation dedicated to improving the quality of neonatal care in Zambia. Her passion is very much around delayed cord clamping, evidence-based interventions, and anemia, particularly in low to middle income countries. She is a lecturer at the moment and also has now working in an assortment of areas, including program evaluation, quality improvement, leadership, and research. So I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you very much. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. So welcome to my presentation. And so after listening to the two previous presentations, which we are all looking at the same topic as mine, I'm now like, okay, I need to look at it in a different angle. So we are talking about midwives leading change in dismantling bullying and racism in practice, which is something that is very dear to my heart as somebody who is very concerned about midwifery workforce. And so you need to understand my background. So looking back at my own journey, in 2013, I moved to South Africa from Zambia for a degree in an advanced degree in midwifery and neonatal nursing science. And so when I went to South Africa, one of my modules that I had to undertake was race, class, and gender. So at first I thought I sat in that class and I was like questioning myself, like, what am I even doing here? I'm from Zambia, and these are issues that we never even come across with, and we don't even talk about it. And so because it was mandatory, I had to do it, and we work a lot, like it was like an elective but compulsory module. And so as weeks went by, I became to love it. I loved the way the lecturer was delivering the module, and she was very passionate. She had suffered from apartheid. She was a colored lecturer and stayed in Zambia, and so I loved everything to do with that. And so looking back at my professional journey today, that has shaped how I look at inequalities that I come across each time that I'm working. So we know that if you know what you're dealing with, you are able to find a solution. Whereas if you do not know about it, you may feel like things are just falling apart and maybe you're not even good enough. And so you start questioning yourself. But having the knowledge of race, class, and gender has really helped me. And so where I went from Zambia, the first time that I walked out of Zambia, I went to Durban at University of KwaZulu-Natal. And as a passionate midwife, I was already a midwife by then. I trained as a midwife in Zambia. I had to move to University of KwaZulu-Natal for an advanced degree in midwifery and neonatal nursing science because I wanted to advance my professional skills in midwifery and neonatal. And so after studying there for 2 years, I moved to Cape Town, which was a different landscape, different university and environment. But then what I learned during my degree really shaped my life. And so I always tell people that I'm able to smell racism, I'm able to smell bullying because I know how it looks like and it comes in different shapes. And so in my 16 years as a midwife and 20 years as a registered nurse, I'm one person that has never participated in those vices because I know how the impact of toxicity is with regards to work culture. Yeah, so that is my background with regards to that. And so just like from the previous session where they were looking at training students, so educators training students on anti-racism, I can actually attest to how important it is for people to understand what they are dealing with so that they can be able to manage differences that they may encounter. Okay. And so probably before we even begin, I have a few questions that probably you can put in the chat. So have you witnessed any bullying or racism in your workplace? So you can just chat, then we can look at that later. So it's very important to be reflective in our practice, because if we're not reflective, we may end up either perpetuating or running away from issues when we meet them. And so we know that bullying and racism can negatively affect how people are working, and it fosters harmful environments for all employees, because no one wants to work in an environment where they are not feeling like they are belonging, or where they feel like it's extremely harmful for them to deliver. And so we need to understand what we are dealing with as at a starting point. Okay, and so in the presentation structure that I have, the first one is setting the scene. And so this is extremely important, and it's building up from what I've already shared with you, starting from how I learned about racism as somebody who was coming from Zambia, where we don't talk about all those issues. There are no differences. We always treat everybody with respect. And so the second one will be how bullying and racism operate in midwifery, then who is most affected and why, then the impact on midwives and even on the care. Then we're going to look at midwives leading change, and then a call to action. Yeah, so we know that bullying and racism have persisted, and there are persistent challenges within healthcare systems which affect the well-being of staff. And so we need to understand that organizational culture is extremely important for retention of staff. And so that is one thing. And so us as midwives can act as advocates, and we can also act as change agents in our leadership roles. And just like the previous speakers that we've had, we know how important leadership is in leading change. So we need leaders that are well informed in the way to manage issues that pertain to bullying and racism, which creates toxic work culture. And so this session sets the scene for understanding the role of midwifery leadership in dismantling bullying and racism and fostering inclusive, respectful, and cultural safe care at all levels. Okay. And so we know the implications of racism. And so the reason why this conversation is extremely important is that we've seen, and we research or evidence has actually shown that new midwives actually drop out off from their clinical practice within their first 5 years of practicing. And so we know the impact of bullying, we know the impact of racism. And so we need to step up and start talking about this, so that we can be able to create positive work environments, which are extremely important. And so these are not just isolated incidents. These are incidents where a lot of people are talking about it, and we know currently that we have a lot of people that are on stress leave because they were bullied, or they felt the sense of not belonging, and or people were maybe gaslighting and all of those vices that create a toxic environment. And then we should also understand that this impact that we are talking about does not just affect the midwives alone. It is something that can also be seen in the patients or the women that and the babies that we are caring for as midwives, and even the way we relate with the families. So we need to know that how I relate with my other midwives, how I relate with my workmates is exactly the same the way I would relate with the people that I'm managing. So it is very important for us to be reflective in our actions, and ensuring that we are not perpetuating these vices that we're talking about, which makes the environment toxic. And so there's usually normalization, and which usually silences people. And so if somebody comes to report about some toxic behavior that they experienced, as leaders, most of the time we just ignore that, or we tell them that it's not a big deal, just don't worry and all of that. Meanwhile, it's hitting up on somebody, it's really eating them up, because they can't just understand why somebody treated them the way they were treated. And so it is very important to note that talking about these issues will actually bring the change that we are talking about. And just today, we've had 3 presentations that are looking at racism. So which shows that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And we as midwifery leaders need to ensure that we are taking lead and ensuring that we are creating a safe space. And so I've had questions that some of the people like asking me to say, so Bupe, how do you manage behaviors And so as somebody who has done healthcare management as a course for 6 months, so for my the course that I went to do in Durban, one of the modules that I had to do was healthcare management. And so in healthcare management, we looked at everything else that contributes to organizational cultures. And most of the aspects that perpetuates wrong or negative organization cultures are things like favoritism, and that's a pitfall in leadership. So me as a leader that has done healthcare management, you never see me having favorites because I know the implication of that. Um, those people usually see, even if they are quiet about the behavior that is happening in an organization, and so them being quiet about it doesn't mean it's not happening. And so as leaders, we need to be reflective of our actions and look at the pitfalls. And so I always tell people that if you are a leader and you've never had any leadership training, just enroll yourself in some leadership training and get the insights on how to be a good leader, because in leadership we have both bad leaders and good leaders. Okay. And so breaking the silence for a safer, inclusive workplace is extremely important. And so leaders should be able to promote those environments where people are able to talk through what they're experiencing, and they need to find a way of ensuring that they are putting an end to such behaviors. So when I was doing my Master of Philosophy in Maternal and Child Health at University of Cape Town, it was an administrative course. And so my course convener took us through management of bad behaviors, we would call them, behaviors that create negative work or toxic work environments. And so one thing that she mentioned was that if you are a leader and then somebody walks to you to talk about another person in the workplace, you need to call the person that the person wants to talk about. Like, for instance, if somebody walks to me and start telling me a negative story about my other colleague, I I have to call the other person so that the person that wants to share a story would take me through in the presence of the other person that the person wants to talk about. And so that cuts off gaslighting, because people will know that no, you don't have to go to Bupe with a story about another person. She will call the person so that you can actually address the person together in the presence of the leader. And so that is one way of managing toxicity and preventing favoritism. And so people would go into favoritism because they want to be noticed, they want to be the ones that are being loved, you know. And so imagine a work environment where everybody feels to belong, everybody is comfortable, and everybody reports for work. So I always tell people that it's important to report for work and do your work. Be objective, work in a team. And so we know that not all groups are teams. So sometimes you can be working in one environment, and you people, instead of working as teams where you're working towards meeting one objective, you're just reporting for work, and the environment is very toxic. Each person is just in their own space, and people know that they belong to this group, but not working as a team in trying to achieve the objective of the company. So it's very important for us to be able to understand how we can actually ensure that we have effective teams and not just groups of people working in an organization. And so when we're talking about the nature of the problem, we know that bullying in midwifery often manifests as incivility. So incivility is like disrespectful behaviors. And so we know that as people, all our interactions are ethically bound. And so we need to ensure that we are not harming people. So we know that non-maleficence does not just apply in research. We need to embrace it in everything that we are doing. And so when we're talking about incivility, we are talking about those behaviors that are disrespectful, and we know that respect is one of our ethical consideration as human beings, which we need to embrace, and we're actually born with it. So we need to embrace it, and each time that we are disrespecting others, we should know that we are being unethical. And so we also know that bullying and racism in midwifery can occur at a horizontal level, where people at the same level are not just working together. Some of them are excluded. There is horizontal violence. And then there's also excessive scrutiny that may come. And so just because you meet somebody who is different from you doesn't mean that that person is less qualified. So as a lady, as a Black lady, I would call myself, as a lady of color, a midwife of color, sometimes when I work in the clinical environment, and being a casual, because I work clinically casually. And so I would meet different midwives. And sometimes when I meet people, they'll be like, hello, are you a registered nurse? And most of them just ask me about being a registered nurse, but I'm in maternity. And then I'll be like, no, I'm a midwife. And then if they continue, sometimes I stop, I put my foot down and I'll be like, I am Dr. Midwife Bupe. I've been a midwife for so long and I've been working here for some time, but I'm casual. I just come here once in a while. That's why you don't see me. And so, you can hear their bullying type of conversation. Why should you think that when you meet me as Bupe, a Black lady, I'm just a registered nurse? I'm actually a midwife who has done advanced midwifery, not just midwifery, but I had to study advanced midwifery. So we need to understand what we're dealing with and how to manage it. And so sometimes racism can be both overt and structural. Overt are just those behaviors where people will just be doing things, unknowingly or even knowingly. And then structurally, sometimes it's in the systems that we have around. And so these behaviors that we see in racism and bullying frequently normalized as part of the culture, allowing harm to just continue, and it's usually unchecked. So we need to understand that it's not normal to disrespect people. And we need to understand our ethical obligations as human beings. So number one is respect. So whenever you are participating or perpetuating bullying and racism, just know that you are being unethical, And so non-maleficence means that we are not supposed to do any harm to anyone. And harm does not just mean injuring people. We know that even the way when we disrespect people, when we are unkind in the way we are talking to others, and when we are gaslighting, when we are bootlicking or practicing everything else that makes the environment toxic, we are actually being unethical. So we need to ensure that we are embracing our ethical considerations at all times. And the other one is veracity. So our obligation to tell the truth at all times. So we need to know that if I go to gaslight about somebody else, I am not being truthful, so I'm being unethical. And then we have justice. So whenever I'm teaching, I always tell my students to say, whenever you're working, and what I usually tell them is that one day you become nurse unit managers, and as a nurse unit manager, you need to know that you need to treat people equally. There's no way that you can have favorites if you know your ethical obligation as a human being. So as nurses and midwives, it's very important for us to ensure that we are embracing the four key principles that shape our practice, which are justice, non-maleficence, um, veracity, and respect, which we should always be embracing at all times. And so why are we talking about this? So we know that bullying and racism are embedded within the hierarchies and power structures that we may have. And so when we're talking about structure, we know that sometimes there are certain voices that are legitimized or protected or even dismissed. If you go to report about some a behavior that you didn't like, sometimes you're just dismissed or ignored. And then it can also be in policies or organizations. And so there are certain times when people just recruit one type of people. Even if I put in my application as somebody who is very qualified, who has done midwifery and has been in like I've attended university for 13 years as a full-time student at different levels, just because I'm not among the people that they are looking for in that company because they have their own structure, then I won't be considered. And so that is organizational, and it's just perpetuating these unethical behaviors that we're talking about. And then sometimes it can be in our individual interactions with others, where there's just some microaggression in some people. And it's extremely important to identify those behaviors and call them out if you can. We need to be speaking out so that we can put an end to these vices. Okay, so this is just how the nature of the problem looks like, where we have incivility and harassment on one end, underbullying, and then exclusion and isolation, where people are working in cliques. So if you have cliques and you are here, make sure you start dismantling those. We can have a work environment where everybody feels to be part and parcel of that work environment, as long as everybody's working towards meeting one goal. And so in 2017, whilst I was studying as a Master of Philosophy in Maternal and Child Health student, I was employed to work on a maternal and child health project where they had issues with retention of staff. People used to quit after being trained. You know how it is in research, you train research assistants, project officers, but because the environment was very toxic, people used to quit within a few weeks of being trained. And so they wanted somebody who can be a site manager to shape those behaviors. So I was employed to work with the teams. And what I did as somebody who was already privy with what was happening, I had to take people through team building. And so in team building, we had sessions where, first of all, I presented how teams build, where I presented about all the processes, from storming, norming, and everything else to the time that teams become effective. And then from that, we had activities that we would do together. And I can assure you, in 1 year that I worked in that project, we had no resignations because people were not happy. I had an open door policy where people would walk in if they were not happy, and I would just listen, and then together we would be able to work through solutions. And most of the time, the reason why people were resigning was because they were not happy with how they were treated. And so it's very important for us as leaders to ensure that we are not perpetuating those vices. And so discrimination was paramount in that organization. There were a lot of stereotypes, and then there was power imbalance, project coordinators felt that they had more power, and so they can do anything that they wanted, and they can just shout at research assistants or project officers with ease. And so we need to know how to relate with people. One thing that I always tell people is that it's very important to know how to address any conflicts. So if we have people that would just give you feedback in front of women and families. I always tell people that if there's any moment where you have to disagree with your colleague, it has to be in a private space where you are the two of you, talk about it, and then move on. Don't just scream at your colleague in front of women and their families. That should not be condoned. And so we need to put an end to these issues that we are talking about. And so the people that are mostly affected when it comes to bullying are Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people. And so we know that racism is usually rooted in colonial histories and structures. And so just from the previous speakers that we had, they really looked at all these factors. And then we also had another presentation which looked at culturally and linguistically diverse midwives. And now we can also add migrants, because not all midwives that migrated are called. There are those that are coming from English-speaking countries, and so they also face the same problem. So it's important for us to understand. And we also need to understand that these structural issues are also embedded in the way people are recruited. Sometimes I actually sit and reflect on why some of the internationally qualified midwives are subjected to so much assessment. When you look at the curriculum and how comprehensive their training has been, and as somebody who has taught in midwifery training, I'm like, oh my goodness, they've done so much than what they actually do. The only difference could be maybe on continuity of care for some other countries. So it's something that can be systemic. So we need to understand that. And then the early career and student midwives. So we've seen how some environments can be very toxic to the newly qualified and the student midwives, which actually demotivates the newly qualified, and in the end, they end up leaving within their first 5 years of being in service. And so we know that racism and bullying deeply impact identity formation. So very few people will come out of racism and bullying experiences that they've had with a positive outlook, some of them will be very much affected, and it affects their capabilities. They start questioning themselves and all of that. So we need to understand the impact and the implication of these behavior. So we've already looked at the people that are affected, which we need to know and understand and be kind to them when we meet them, as if we're not in that group. And so when we're looking at midwives at the intersection of marginalization, we are looking at midwives who experience multiple forms of marginalization, such as race, gender, migration status, or class, and disproportionately exposed to these bullying and racism issues that we are talking about. And so this intersection compounds the risks and intensifies the harm, the bullying and racism harm that we're talking about. And so sometimes bullying and racism are silenced and they're just normalized. Whenever you try to report harm, it is just reframed as a personality clashes. Sometimes you just meet people that you may not relate well. So, don't worry, it's just a personality clash. Meanwhile, a person is suffering from the consequences of being bullied. And so reporting systems lack trust or transparency. So if there are organizations that have reporting systems, they might not be transparent. And then whistleblowers experience retaliation or career harm. If you try to report what you observed, you feel like you start being targeted and you feel like maybe people will be working against you. And so those with the least institutional power carry the highest risk in speaking out. So that is something that we need to know. And so we know the reasons why most of these people are affected. There could be some power and hierarchical nature of organizations where there's seniority over vulnerability, and then dominant racial and cultural norms, and medical authority over midwifery autonomy, which we see when we're working with our obstetricians. And so midwives are positioned outside these norms are more easily targeted. And so that's why it's important to understand why things are happening. Then sometimes the organizations also act as perpetrators of these harmful behaviors. For instance, we do have policies that talk about bullying and anti-racism, but how is the implementation? Do we even have people that have gone around organizations trying to check on what we call process evaluation? How are people implementing these policies? Are they implementing them the way they are supposed to be implemented? Or they are just there for people to read and no one follows it up? And then lack of accountability. So, even when you report some behaviors to the leader, instead of the leader taking it up so that the person who is the perpetrator can be made accountable of what they did, it is just ignored. And then there's that leadership disconnect from lived experience. So as long as you're not the one that is affected, as the leader, most of the time they just ignore it. And so this reinforces a cycle where harm is acknowledged rhetorically, but not meaningfully addressed. So they just ignore it and they move on as business as usual. And so we know the impact of bullying on midwives. We've seen how many midwives have left practice because of bullying and racism. And we know how many of the midwives that are on stress leave because of what they experienced at work. And this impact does not just affect the midwives alone. It also affects the women that we care for, the families that we care for, because if we're not working as a team, if we're just working as a group, it means there's a disconnect in the management. But when we are working as effective and collaborative teams, we are able to deliver maternity care that is appreciated, and people will be able to feel that there's that collaboration in the work that we are doing. Okay. And so we should understand that bullying and racism can be at different levels. And so we have organizational, which we've already looked at, structural, and even the way the leadership is built up in these organizations. So we need to understand how promotions come about. Are people able to be given same positions, or others are given better positions than others? And so there's need for systemic change. And so the shift should focus on, should focus on leadership and culture, because that is extremely important in trying to break the cycle of bullying and racism. And so this goes beyond individual coping. So you can't just say that you don't just know how to cope with issues. You've had a clash, so you need to know how to manage it. Or maybe this person has no resilience, the resilience to move on from those negative experiences. So it's very important to ensure that the policies are well implemented, they are followed up, and well implemented according to the way they are supposed to deliver. And so leadership training is extremely important, because we know that we have leaders who are managing our a lot of organizations that have no leadership training whatsoever. And so if somebody doesn't know what they are dealing with, or if somebody doesn't know that favoritism is actually a pitfall in leadership, they will just be perpetuating it, because they don't know that it's not supposed to be practiced. Even when we have people that perpetuate gaslighting in organizations, or gossiping and everything else that makes the environment toxic. And so when we're talking about the consequences of bullying and racism with regards to workforce and care, we know that what that would do to the person that is being bullied or that is facing racism is that it will work on their mental health. So they'll be mentally drained, they'll be burnt out to the maximum. We spend much of our time at work. So if I'm not happy at work, it means that I'll be spending much of my time misery. And so that works on the mental health well-being of the person. And so there's also attrition that comes with that, because you'll be reflecting, asking yourself to say, why am I even here? What am I doing? Why should I be sad, like forever sad, Monday to Friday, if you're working on a 5-day shift? So it is very important to understand this. And then we need to ensure that we are not silencing and creating those environments where people are afraid to report, because they are like, even if I tell my leader, there's nothing much that can be done. And so fear of retaliation prevents midwives from reporting issues, allowing bullying and racism to persist, which is something that we need to put an end to. So we know that the impact of a safe environment has been seen, and evidence has shown that for respect for maternity care, the environment should be supportive. And so bullying undermines safety. And so where somebody is not happy, they won't be able to deliver the care that that is a quality, because they'll be stressed. And when you are stressed, you even when a woman is just asking about a simple thing, you may either just answer rudely because you're hurt. So we need to ensure that we know that whatever we are doing, and if we're perpetuating these racism and bullying, that we are affecting the quality of care. And so there's also psychological safety that is extremely important. So psychological safety is essential to prevent errors and promote teamwork in a fast-moving maternity care setting. So we know how important prevention of errors is in our practice, because if you are not psychologically well, you'll be able to you make errors. And so we need to ensure that we're working towards a safe environment. And so racism leads to inequities by affecting how racialized women and families are treated and heard. So if we are able to see racism among the workforce, trust me, even people that are different from the people that are the majority in that area will face exactly what the midwives will be facing. So racism and bullying will go to the women and families that we are caring for. And so inclusive workplace enhances care, and it provides inclusive workplaces, which are key to providing safe, equitable maternity care, and protecting midwives from actually leaving the practice. So this is just a breakdown of the impacts which we've already looked at, and all the other impacts that midwives can have from bullying and racism. So if we are to talk about retention of midwives, we need to look at the environments where midwives are working. How positive are these environments? If they are toxic, we will be singing about shortage of midwives like we are just making noise, because as long as we haven't sorted out the issues that are affecting midwives, they'll be leaving for sure. Okay, so we've already looked at the impact. And so there's also, I've already mentioned about the impact on the women and the babies that we're caring for. So as long as somebody is able to mistreat another person or disrespect another midwife, it's very possible that they can disrespect the families and women and babies that they are managing. So we need to ensure that we put an end to that. And so that we can have a positive work environment for both midwives and the families that we are supporting. And so how do we reframe the problem? So we need to look at the issue of racism and bullying, and look at it in a different way, where we are not just focusing on an individual conflict that one person is experiencing, but then go deep and look at a systemic and cultural harm that is being caused. Then we also need to look at it from a perspective of not just focusing on resilience training, but also organizational accountability. So organizations may have the policies, but then if they are not being implemented, then it's nothing that is being done, and the organization is not accountable. And so we need to move from silence and adaptation to courage, reflexivity, and collective action. So every one of us should be able to reflect on our action towards the other. And it's very important for us to have moments where we are able to pause, reflect, and then act. So it's not business as usual. You don't just wake up every day and go and work, and if you're a perpetrator or bullying or racism, you just continue like nothing is happening. We need to be reflective on our actions, and our actions should be ethically bound. So remember, we are ethical beings, and our interactions should be ethically bound. And so when we're talking about towards change, what are we talking about? So we are talking about people being able to understand the problem as the first step. So as long as you do not understand what you are dealing with, it will be very difficult for you to solve it. Remember, from the beginning, I mentioned that I sat in class for 6 months to learn about race, class, and gender. And so I do understand racism. And I always tell people that I can smell racism and bullying just on first contact when I meet people, because I know I'm different. And so I tell people that when you meet me as a person. Don't meet me as a Black person. Meet me as a person, and everything will be good. And from our differences, we can actually do exploits. But if you start thinking that, oh, Bupe is a Black lady, and so you can't work with Bupe, you're missing out. Bupe has experience. Bupe has worked in Zambia, South Africa, and Australia. And so the way she looks at life and the way she looks at midwifery practice is extremely different from the way you're looking at it. So work with the differences. Treat people as people. Don't look at their color. Doesn't matter. Okay. So we need to ensure that we are embedding cultural safety and anti-racism in education and practice, just like from the previous session that we had, and ensuring that our environments are safe, and supporting midwives that have voiced out. Okay. So I can see Liz is there. I'm sure I've gone beyond time. So let's talk about what change requires. So we need to acknowledge that racism and bullying are there, and we need to promote people talking about it. Reflexivity is extremely important, and then we need to ensure that we have safe spaces where people can talk about their experiences. And then organizational accountability is extremely important. And then education and capacity building, because people may not know about their behaviors, and then leaders may not know that they are perpetuating issues unless they are trained. Then centering and cultural safety and equity is extremely important. And then persistence and long-term commitment to anti-racism and anti-bullying in workplaces. And so in reframing the change, we need to refuse to normalize harm. We need to act in solidarity, and then advocate for equity. Then shape cultures where dignity, respect, and safety are non-negotiable. And so in conclusion, it is very important for us to talk about a call to action. So we need to, first of all, understand that bullying and racism are there, and then we need to know that we are there to put an end to that. So I always tell people that if you've been bullying others, when you come to me, I'm that person where that your bullying attitude will end, because I'm not going to tolerate it and I'll call it the way it is. Okay, and so we need to ensure that we are ethical in our practice and we are not harming people through our actions. Okay, so thank you very much for listening, and remember to be the change that you want to see in midwifery practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask for a quick question, although I know there is no such thing to a quick question and a quick answer to this issue. But does anyone have any questions in the chat? Celine put in a lovely quote that is, a team is not a group of people who work together. A team is a group of people who trust each other. And you can't have trust in an environment that is harassment and bullying and racism is occurring.